Bane is so much different than the comics in this movie. Like Bane in the comics has like this venom top fluid that he like pumps into his body to make him big and strong and crazy.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that's about his entire character, from my understanding.
Okay.
Um, and this movie, they make him so much more interesting, and I appreciate it.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot. I'm your host, as always, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite guests, Andrew, to discuss the third in the Christopher Nolan series with Batman, The Dark Knight Rises, the 2012 superhero film that was written by Christopher Nolan and his brother Jonathan, with a story also assisted by David S. Goyer. So, getting into the first impressions of this film, Andrew, what were your thoughts?
It's good. I like Bane. Not as good as the last one.
Yeah, it definitely is not as ideal as the previous film. I think there's still a lot going for it, though, and a lot of that. This is definitely an interesting, in my mind, anyways, an interesting film where it is definitely carried by the main characters, and some of the side stuff really gets short shafted in this film compared to in the previous films. But
So
we'll get
the
into that
opposite
today.
of Back to the Future, then.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so let's get into it. The rating system, as always, is what we use to determine a line of how effective were they at telling the story and to outline it ourselves. So, based on the 9 point rating system, Andrew, what did you give this film?
I didn't take the quiz, but I did. It's not loading. Um, so just gonna
Okay.
ballpark it. Probably like a 6.8, 6.9.
Oh, okay. That's higher than, I mean, lower than I gave it. So yeah, it's actually pretty good. I gave it a 7.15. So it was
Wow.
not the highest film, but it still deserved a pretty solid rating for me. And it's obviously one I'd watch again, right? I enjoy it a lot. Um, Not nearly as good as I think it was an 8.5 that the last one got from me, but it's still worthy of a solid rating, and I think that shows through even in a 6.8. So we'll get into that today. But yeah, before we get into that, you want to give a brief summary to everyone who's not familiar with The Dark Knight Rises, what that story's about.
Yeah. So basically, following off of the end of the last Batman movie, Batman's kind of a depressed hobo now, lives in a certain singular portion of his mansion. He hosts fundraisers and stuff. People knows who he is, but he's become this recluse over the past, I think it's like 8 years since the last movie. And so he's kind of just living in hiding. They introduce Selena Kyle, also known as Catwoman, because there's Catwoman, there's Black Cat, but Black Cat is Marvel. So not to get the two confused, not that they're anything alike at all. Anyways, she steals something from Bruce Wayne. They introduce the character of Bane, who's basically just a buffer Tom Hardy version of Ra's al Ghul, kind of. And Bruce Wayne has to step back into the ring and fight, and he realizes, wow, age does not do Batman very well. So he's got arthritis, he got all kind of fun problems. He ends up in the pit, he comes out, conquers his fear, and fights Bane. There's lots of icky details all in between, but that's the basic gist of it. He fights a bad guy. Bad guy wants to take over Gotham and show that Gotham is cuckoo crazy.
Yep. So yeah, this one is definitely jumping off of the previous one, and in some ways jumping off the first one as well, which is really interesting to see some melding of those ideas into a single film. So they had a lot of great things they did starting off with the concept of this film. I think there was some lacking in execution, though. But we'll get into that. Let's start off with the initial opening of this film, or instead of instead of Batman returning, the first thing we see is the introduction of the next villain, and that is of Bane on this plane with the CIA agent. What was your impression of the introduction of this film and the introduction to this brand new villain?
It wasn't as much of an attention grabber to me, I'm gonna be honest. Like it was I don't think it was bad necessarily. I just think that the whole tying in of Dr. Pavel, like it was very disconnected because it came so much later in the movie that you're like, oh wait, I do remember this guy being at the beginning of the movie. Um, I think they introduced Bane pretty well. You got the iconic Tom Hardy voice of Bane. Um, you kind of get this menace. They up the tensions pretty well with him, starting right off the bat. Um, those are my thoughts on the plane scene. I don't think it was like anything phenomenal, but I also don't think it was necessarily bad. If that makes sense.
No, no, and I think that that's an interesting note to take. I think it stuck out to me maybe more so because as I was watching this, I realized that the what we see in this is one of pretty much two of the openers that you will see in basically every superhero film going forward, and that is of the what you see at the beginning of Batman Begins, which is the origin story. This is the superhero we're dealing with. You have some version of that, or reestablishing them as okay, these are the characters fighting the enemies, and you're reintroducing how powerful they are and what their capabilities are and whatnot. Usually that's the opener, or you have the alternate opener where you see the villain introduced, where they are shown to have some sort of motive or whatever they're going for. Um, and I think that that's something you've seen, in the Marvels. It's something you've seen in Captain America's. You've seen it in multiple of the Marvel Cinematic Universe from there. So it's not unusual to see that as an opener in movies today. What I thought was interesting was that this one, in some ways, felt less um, maybe stock, even though it is pretty stock in regards to an opener. And I was wondering why. And maybe this is me just spitballing, so feel free to challenge this. But one of the ideas I thought was that um, right off the bat, you get with these two villain openers in both The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, an introduction of a villain who stands for something outside of themselves. And you see that ideal introduced right off the bat, where you see the Joker saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stranger, right? And this idea of the things that you go through creates a more and more anarchical world, versus in this one you see that he stands for some sort of mission beyond himself, and you don't know what that is yet with Bane, but you know that it exists, and that gets developed as the story progresses. So there's, I think, some ideas that get thrown off right off the bat that make this villain more unique and compelling compared to just the atypical I am angry and I want to destroy the world, like we see with the lady in the Marvels who's going up against those girls. So I think that there's something to be said for that, and for making at least an intriguing hook, right? Something that makes you go, okay, well, what does this guy stand for? I want to see more. So yeah, in regards to superhero films, I think it's at least worth noting and trying to replicate if you are creating your own story, right? How does a villain or introducing a hero, how do you introduce them in a way that makes them unique from the rest of the crowd, stand out, be eye-catching, and some of that is what do they stand for? What are the words they're speaking right off the bat, right? And he's immediately off the bat pointing out inconsistencies. Oh, why would you shoot someone you're about to throw out of a plane? That doesn't make any sense. And then he goes, yeah, and then he proceeds to just spout on his ideology from there on out.
Typical villain. You just got to throw in a monologue there. But at least
Yeah.
with Bane, I appreciate the monologue because I like listening to the voice. Um, um, yeah, I mean that's an interesting way of putting it. I not really have any pushback per se. I think just again, my big problem with the opener is like it feels very disconnected, and I think this goes for a couple of portions of the movies where there are parts where like the Dark Knight felt like it just kind of transitioned so smoothly with so many different parts of it. Whereas The Dark Knight Rises feels like there's a lot of like disjointedness between certain scenes or certain arcs that kind of like are started and then kind of like left in the dust and then picked up towards the end. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. Now I have to really think about where this person came from. Specifically, Dr. Pavel is like, we don't know why he's important. And then we kind of learn, they like mention that the scientist was killed. And you're like, okay, I'm assuming it was that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes in later. But there, I don't know.
Right.
I'm
Well,
not
and you
sure how
see
they
that
would.
too, even in the disconnection, just jumping way ahead. But to prove your
Yeah.
point, you see that with the it's like the NSA or the FBI or something later on in the film, where they introduce them for the sole purpose of explaining why they don't get involved in Gotham, right? And you see them have some sort of dialogue of, oh, if we get involved, they're going to kill everyone or reduce the flyovers and do surveillance over the top. You really don't see, and so you see a couple minutes like that where they do it to try to, I guess, explain away what's going on or to provide some sort of imperative for you as the audience to say, okay, this is a cohesive story, right? It makes sense, but it is pretty disjointed because that is the only time you see any interaction with the outside world other than this opening scene, which is also outside of Gotham. And it's like, what is this? Why are we watching
Yeah.
this? And it makes sense later on, but like you said, you don't see that until an hour and a half later.
Yeah. And the thing is like, when I'm thinking about these scenes, I'm thinking about it also from the audience's perspective, because as the audience member, you want to be pulled into this movie.
Right.
The goal of the storyteller is to immerse the audience or the listener or the reader in the story. And so when you do stuff like this, it kind of breaks that for them. It pulls them out of the story. It like kind of
Right.
breaks up the narrative for them, and it just feels disjointed.
Yeah. And I think that that's a fair critique. They are trying to do a lot in this film, and so they run into a
Yes.
problem that is seen in a lot of films, where they start to just throw things in there very quickly and then move on, which is what you
Yeah.
saw with the FBI thing. I wouldn't say that's super bad with this film because they do spend some time just establishing Bane in this scene, but it is a little disjointed from the rest, so I can see where you're coming from with that.
Yeah.
Um, it would be interesting to continue the discussion with Bane, but Bane, before we get too deep into that, it's important to discuss Batman in this film because he is the antagonist to Batman, and so in a lot of ways, their interaction is critical to an understanding of the whole film. What was your thoughts um, on Batman and what he does in this film, who he is, and all that stuff?
Well, I have several thoughts. Some of them are much less important, but I'm going to mention them anyways. One, facial hair was doing him no favors. That the goatee thing, not working for Batman. But you know what? Sure. Second, I'll be honest. The first time I watched this movie, I was like, bro, what is Bruce Wayne doing? This is pathetic. Like, Batman is depressed. Yeah, his character's always depressed. Why is this depression all of a sudden unique? Um, but
You're
I
talking
think
about
also
this time, you like every time you watch this, or just this, like the first time you watched it?
the first time I watched it. I'll explain why. But I think it's interesting because watching it over again, Nolan does do his own twist on a lot of things. Um, and Batman, very few times in the comics will truly get like really depressed. Um, like, because that's his whole persona is I'm depressed and I bury all of my emotions and I take out all of this by fighting crime, kind of. Not exactly the healthiest form of dealing with trauma, but you know, Batman does his own thing, and we all
Mm-hmm.
benefit. Um, and so like there are a few times he gets upset. One of the times is like when Jason Todd gets beaten to death by the Joker. Another time is when Dick Grayson dies in a certain iteration of Batman comics, and like it kind of breaks him. I don't know that it breaks him to the point where he stops fighting crime for 8 years, but I think they do a good job of explaining why he's stopped his crime fighting streak. Because not only is it that he's lost Rachel, he also kind of took the blame for everything that Harvey Dent did. And so, in his mind, one, he's depressed, and while Batman might have gone back to crime fighting and just kind of buried his emotions further that way, he has no crime fighting to go back to because part of his mission was fulfilled in that he took all the fall for Harvey Dent. And you see that throughout the beginning of the movie where they've kind of explained that all of this crime, organized crime at least, has kind of gone down almost completely, thanks to the Dent Act, as they call it. And like to Batman, in his mind, or Bruce Wayne in his mind, his mission is achieved.
Right.
I think Batman in this movie is probably... I think he's the best character, not gonna lie. At least in terms of like his development.
Sure. 100%. Yeah.
I think that like it's, for this movie especially, his character has a lot more going for him than he did in other movies in terms of like his own personal struggles he's dealing with. In the first one, you have, I'm going to combat fear, yada yada, very Batman-esque. This movie, he's much more human than the last two. It's a much more humanizing movie for Bruce Wayne, Batman. And you have his whole dialogue with Alfred, too, where Alfred's like, bro, you did it. You're done. Do not be Batman anymore. I quit, because Batman sucks, and you're going to die. And then at the end, Alfred is like, we'll talk about Alfred when we get to him. But I think Batman's character, for me, I appreciate the fact that they humanized him a lot more in this movie. Despite the other things that the movie did, I think Bruce Wayne's character was not one of the problems with this movie.
No, absolutely not. And I would 100% agree with that. I think that it was very interesting to see the way that they developed this movie compared to previous movies in multiple ways, right? And how they took things that they laid down in previous movies and carried them through in this movie in a very interesting way. One of them is exactly what you said, Batman. And I don't need to go into the details of that because you just did, but I think that they did it very well with showing a character that is embittered in some ways, even toward the character of the Batman, right? Where he is this persona that he was trying to put down so that he could have another life. And the moment that he can, the life he wanted is gone because the girl he loved is dead. So it's a very compelling story for this embittered man. And I don't know if you've seen people like this, but I've seen people like this who, when something happens to them it's genuinely terrible, they can't let it go. And it will haunt them for the rest of their life. And he is that person, right? He's this person who just can't let go of the past. And it's haunting him. And this is what Alfred is trying to help him with. It's what even the other people like Lucius Fox are trying to help him get out of this situation and say, hey, move on with your life. There are other things in life. And he just can't do it. He's so caught up in this future that he imagined with Rachel that now can never be, that she promised would happen, right, in the first film. So it's very, very good. And then, of course, you have him introduced to John Blake, who then says, I know you're the Batman, take on the mantle because we need the Batman back.
Yeah.
What was your thoughts on Batman being reintroduced into the story?
I think it's interesting because it's like Bruce Wayne, there are a couple of things that they do with him. One is the thing that, or the aspect where he is not afraid of death to the point where he almost welcomes it. And Bane talks about this later in the movie where he's like, why didn't you kill me? And he's like, you welcome death. And he's like, I have a much better punishment for you. You're going to watch as this all happens because killing you would be a mercy. And I'm not a merciful dude, so not going to happen.
Yeah.
But you also have the element where Batman is kind of like, he's a hermit because he's lost his purpose. His purpose before was to protect Gotham, and that was fulfilled, and his plan originally was, my purpose will now be to start a life, to live that life with Rachel. But both of those purposes are stripped from him at the end of the second movie, and so he's left without direction. He's a man without a cause. And so, as soon as the problem of Bane presents itself, or even Selina Kyle, like as soon as she breaks in, he's like, I guess I'm going to go back down to the Batcave and start looking into this.
Right.
As soon as he's given any semblance of a purpose again, he jumps at that opportunity. And so I think in terms of reintroducing the Batman, one, they did a good job of not reintroducing the S tier, like super Giga Chad Batman who's gonna beat up everyone right out the gate.
Right. Right.
He very clearly has problems like that have. It's been 8 years, and if you've watched the other two movies, he didn't exactly treat his body very well. Jumping off
Right.
buildings and explosions and all kinds of other stuff is not great for your joints, people. FYI. Also, age. Um, so I think they did a good job reintroducing the Batman in a believable way, but also giving him a realistic motivation as well.
I think that's an interesting take. I think your take is one that, if I understand it correctly, is he's a nuanced character where in one aspect he says, I'm withdrawing from society, my life is meaningless, blah, blah, blah. But then on the other hand, he's actually doesn't fully believe that and is looking for purpose. And as soon as he has that opportunity, he jumps at it.
Yeah, I
Is that
see. I see his character as more of being he's depressed because his life has no meaning, and so like he didn't really want to give up the Batman mantle until Rachel was like, I will wait for you. And if you watch the first two movies, that's really the thing driving him to give up the mantle. Like when he talks about
right?
Harvey Dent being the hero that they need, it I don't want to say it's like a selfish motivation, but it kind of is. Like he's a human. He wants to be fulfilled in life, and Batman being Batman isn't really all that fulfilling for Bruce Wayne. Um, and so in this movie, he's looking for the closest thing he can get to having purpose, and he has none of that. Like, what is Batman going to do when there's no organized crime? When the Dent Act is doing all the work that it needs, and when Batman is a fugitive? Like, there's nothing for him to do other than that, and he. So on that end, there's nothing for him. On the end of like living a normal life, Bruce Wayne is depressed out of his mind because this woman that he loved was burned alive by the Joker, and that was everything he was fighting for, and he doesn't have that
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
This movie is interesting, and maybe this is where I'll take a little bit of a different stab at this than you, and this is maybe where I have more of a problem with this film than previous ones. Is I don't think his motive is necessarily there or clear as. Although your take is interesting, I could maybe be persuaded to buy it. I don't think that it's non-existent like your motives you said that Marty McFly had in Back to the Future, but
You
that's not
know,
for this
Maverick,
podcast.
I think we ought to just drop that here and just agree, shake on it, that we will leave Back to the Future alone.
We'll leave that for the next. We're Back to the Future too.
Let bygones be bygones for now.
Oh yeah. The for going back to the film at hand, we're talking about Bruce Wayne. In the previous two movies, there was this undercurrent of vengefulness and anger about these different things that have gone on in his life, and I get the sense in which in this film it's beyond that, and there's a sense in which he is lost that anger against the undercurrent of society, right? That has destroyed his family, that has killed his parents, and then that killed Rachel. To a certain degree, now he's just a broken man, right? Left with those experiences and at a loss for where to go with his life. And while I think that the idea of finding purpose is interesting, I think his motive, right, which he speaks about several times in this story, right? There's always people that you love and care about, and this this city. Why do you care about the city? The city's done nothing for you. Uh, in some ways, rings a little hollow for him because I don't see where his care for the city comes from or where it stems. Because he has, in many ways, been destroyed by this city. He's lost everything in his pursuit of saving this Gotham, and Gotham's really given him nothing. They've turned their back on him and said that he is the villain of this universe, and so he's hidden for the past 8 years because of that, as at least partially because of that. And so I think that his motive to get involved because John Blake comes up and says there's this bad guy and we need help stopping him and the police aren't good enough at it. Um, I'm not sure where the obligation to become Batman again really is. I think that the idea that he has, like you said, that he has some sort of strive for purpose is interesting. I don't know that I see it very played out very well if that is the motive, though.
I mean, what was his driving motivation in the first movie, per se? Like, what got
Uh,
him to be Batman to begin with, in your mind?
it was definitely some sense of vengefulness, right? And that's what you see with especially him going to kill the man who killed his parents initially. Is you see that he has been brooding on this for years and years and years. And part of that whole struggle is understanding what is the difference between justice and vigilantism, right? Or well, he still is a vigilante, I guess, but what is true justice and what is just being angry and taking it out on people.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that gets continued in the next film, and then kind of gets ended when he loses everything. I don't get the impression, let's just say, that that same motive continues into this film, and I don't get that from the dialogue with Bruce Wayne either.
I see what you're saying about his motivations in the first movie, and I don't want to go too much in depth with Batman Begins, but, like, I don't really see his motivations for becoming Batman as revenge. I feel like that's more his motivation to go and train with Ra's al Ghul and everything that he does. But like his more motivation for becoming Batman is kind of a sense of duty or a sense of being like my parents fought for this city. I want to carry on that legacy, which is kind of what Alfred is kind of pushing in the first movie. Um, and his character is very much about we like don't take revenge out because this isn't like that isn't my job, and he kind of points that out with Ra's al Ghul. Like I am not judge, jury, and executioner. That's not my role. Um, and that's why I think his return as Batman, and kind of the reason he fails, honestly, is because he's doing it purely as he needs a sense of purpose. Like it's very rushed. He doesn't have the means to take off on Bane, and Bane tells him, he says, "Peace has defeated you." Um,
Right.
and he like beats him to a pulp and then sticks him in a prison. And Batman kind of has to go through his whole journey all over again and then come back to Gotham.
Maybe there's something there. I think we'll continue the conversation, and like I said, I think I could be convinced on this point specifically because, yeah, like you said, there is some level of arrogance to him too, as at this point as well, where he thinks that Batman is an unstoppable force, and that is part of the reason that Bane is such a compelling villain, is
Yeah,
because Batman specifically says that you can't, like, there's nothing that Batman can't do, and that's one of the challenges that Alfred is constantly pushing at him. That you think you're this unstoppable man until you die, and you're pushing yourself to that limit. And Bruce Wayne tells him, "Oh well, he can't die because he's that good, basically." And Bane is the counter to that. So yeah, there might be something there for sure. I don't want to get too caught up in that, but I think it's definitely worth trying to note to see where his motivations lie.
yeah. And I mean,
Did
Alfred
you
even says, like, he points it out, you think that you just because you have a brand new, like, arsenal from Lucius Fox, you can take on Bane. And Bruce Wayne's kind of like, yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But yeah, go
100%.
ahead.
No. And I think that leads on. I mean, you see that he's pretty uninvolved, and then John Blake says, "Hey, we need your help." He gets involved in the case that ends up being about his trades as the stockbroker person, and then there's this further descent into chaos as he goes to stop Bane, and then gets betrayed by Catwoman, and all the furthering of the conflict where he gets thrown into the jail. Did you think that that was compellingly built up for him as the protagonist getting thrown in a worse situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really showed it because Batman in this movie kind of has a sense of hubris, and it goes to not only defeat him physically, but defeat him mentally as well. Like he has been completely and utterly crushed by Bane, and he is stuck now in a prison with no way out, and he just gets to watch this city that he has spent so long trying to save crumble now. Going from just confronting Bane to being thrown in the prison, yeah. I think it does a good
Yeah.
job of heightening the tensions for him.
No, I'd agree. Generally, it's pretty solid. Not the best thing I've ever seen, but it was pretty good. And I think that especially the point where he thinks he's so good, and then the fight with Bane, which maybe it's an appropriate point to talk about Bane, is just one of probably my favorite fights I've seen in cinema, just because that is where you visually get to see the strength of the villain in every single punch, where he doesn't just fight Bane. Bane just stands there and takes every single punch that Bruce Wayne can throw at him, and then punches back right away as if nothing happened. It's so good. I really
Yeah.
love that fight.
I mean, even building up to this, Bane has so many good lines. Like when when Daggett's just like, "Where's Bane?" He goes, "Speak of the devil, and he shall
Yeah,
appear." And just the putting the hand on his shoulder. Do you feel in charge?
yeah, yeah.
Ooh, it's good. Okay. Uh,
It is good. Yeah.
I will say, Bane is so much different than the comics in this movie. Like, Bane in the comics has, like, this venom talk fluid that he, like, pumps into his body to make him big and strong and crazy.
Uh huh.
And that's about his entire character, from my understanding.
Okay.
In this movie, they make him so much more interesting, and I appreciate it.
Uh huh.
And Tom Hardy's execution is phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, it's
So,
like there's a certain sense in which he's this mercenary slash terrorist, but he stands for something more, and that is what makes him so interesting, because he's basically this philosopher who walks around with a massive, like, super strong body and bulletproof vest, and that's all he's wearing besides his cargo pants, and he just talks about how society needs to take hold of their own future and, you know, take down the bourgeoisie as he plans to demolish them all, right? And so it's very interesting as he has these higher purposes and higher ideals, and he points back to ideas and themes that we've seen in the first film and in the second film, and brings them together into a single idea of, oh, well, I am part of the League of Shadows too, and I'm here to finish what was started in the first film. At the same time, I'm taking the same ideas of anarchy that were introduced in the second film, and I'm bringing them together here and seeing that play out on the full front, where people do turn on each other, where they
yeah.
are taking down the rich and killing them and sentencing them to death by going out into the ice and falling through into the cold, cold water, right? That is a scenario that he's pushing forward by his ideology that he's spouting to the people, and he's talking about taking the city and giving it back to you, the people. And it's so good. Like, as a villain, his lines are amazing. There's so many and the important point too is not just that he says such amazing lines, right? It's like, whatever, you can have pithy lines that are awesome. At the end of the day, they're quotable, but whatever. But it's also the sense in which that he is the complete counter to everything that Batman stands for, right? The fact that everything that Batman can do, he can do better. He literally takes all of Batman's arsenal and acquires it for himself. So it's not just that there's one Batmobile, but there's 10, and they're all controlled by the bad guy. Or that he now has the ability to fight Batman, or he always had the ability to fight Batman, and he can take the punches and punch back, right? All of these ideas that Batman thinks he's unstoppable, and in every way, Bane is better.
Yeah.
So, very well played out.
I mean, I think the other thing that's interesting is, like, the Joker also has great lines of dialogue. So many good lines, so many quotable lines. But the thing that makes their lines so good is that they come from the place of that is their character. It's not like, oh, we're just going to give this character awesome lines of dialogue. It's, we're going to make an awesome character who would say these sort of things. Which
Yeah.
is like, as soon the first time he runs into Batman, Batman is telling Selena Kyle, like, "You made a terrible mistake," and you just hear
Yeah.
Bane. not as terrible as yours, I'm afraid. It's just like,
Yeah,
it's good.
yeah,
Also,
no,
not gonna lie,
absolutely right.
that line, that peace has cost you your strength, victory has defeated you. That's how every debater feels at the beginning of a new season. after after a summer of no debate, you go back, you two debate round, you're like, dang man, I feel like an idiot.
I suck.
Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. Um, no, and so I think that that's important for the development of Batman because he is that counter. He is thrown into the prison, and then from there he has to see his city burn as it gets thrown into further anarchy, and he has to figure out a way of escaping. What did you think of that transformation of Bruce Wayne slash Batman in the hole in the ground?
I'll be honest. This is part of the movie that confused me a little bit. Um,
Okay.
like I don't know that it's bad. It's just we already got Batman conquering his fears in the first movie. So why are we doing it again? Is kind of my whole thought process with this movie. It's like because the whole thing with him not being able to jump across that last portion of the hole in the ground, if you will, the prison, to get to the top, is they say like you're too afraid, basically. Like you need to do it without the rope and conquer your fears, and then you'll be able to jump across the chasm. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, I'm gonna be honest. The whole thing of Batman just training again to leave just reminded me of like a Rocky Balboa training montage. Uh,
Uh-huh.
like that was basically what it was. It's just him training to be Batman again. And I guess this is kind of where it feels disjointed for me because I think Batman has good motivations for getting back into the fray, per se. Because his motivation isn't necessarily, I'm going to save the city in my mind, it is, I need purpose, and my purpose is to be Batman now. And then he fails at that. And I don't know. It's just, I can't put my finger on why it isn't great or amazing. It just felt kind of like, okay, we're just watching a generic superhero movie now where the heroes just
Hmm.
gets beat down and they're gonna get back up anyways.
Right. Well, yeah, and there's a certain sense in which in that scene, I think the first time you don't see him make the jump successfully is genuinely surprising because you think that he will, he's going to get out, but
Yeah,
then he doesn't. But then the subsequent ones after that, for sure, there's still an idea that at the very least he will make it out of this scenario.
yeah,
And so there's no real doubt about that, and that's an interesting thing to point out is even though he's at the worst of his worst, you get the idea that oh, he survived, right? Bane let him live and he's trying to get out.
yeah,
Therefore he will get out. And there's no concern there that he won't. So maybe that's a misrepresentation of expectations from the creator's perspective of the story, right? Where they didn't provide enough doubt that he couldn't just die by falling, right? Versus the promise that oh, tons of people have died falling through this. Why don't we, as the audience, believe that the main character will also die by falling because he
yeah,
doesn't, right? So I think that's a fair point, and maybe some of that too is you start to see some suspension of previous uh, rules, quote unquote, that they already established at this point in the story, where Bruce Wayne is established that he has no cartilage in any of his primary limbs, right? He doesn't
yeah,
have cartilage in his knees, he doesn't have cartilage in his elbows, and so part of the reason he needs to walk with a cane is that he's in some ways almost a disabled human being
yeah,
because of his previous experience fighting. And in this part of the film, he just starts to work out as if nothing's wrong
yeah,
and he's perfectly fine. Which, if you have that previously understood medical condition, you don't just grow back cartilage, right? It's gone. So him being able to do this is kind of a load of BS. So I
but he's
think that there are,
Batman.
but he's Batman. Yeah, exactly. Like that's the justification. That's the reason why we could say, oh, it's fine when it's really not. So there are things like that do pull you out of the movie, and I think that could, at least in some degrees, delve subconsciously into that. Because if he can work out when he shouldn't, like earlier in the film, you can argue his Batman fighting ability is justifiable because he puts on the knee brace, right? And
Yeah.
other things like that help him to then function like a normal Batman would. You don't have that when you're thrown into the pit,
Yeah.
right? Or at least I seriously doubt that Bane's going to be like, here's all these medical equipment for you to use while you are down here in the pit. Like, it doesn't make any sense for him to do that. So, it seems to be illogical a little bit at that point, and I think that at the very least hurts its credibility, and if he can then work out like that, of course he's going to be able to get out of the pit, you know? So anyways.
Let's play the devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Hear me out. Homeopathic remedies.
Is that it?
Wow, I mean, I could expound. In all seriousness, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. There's this doctor guy who supposedly is going to keep Batman alive, and kind of like make it so, Batman can work again. I don't think Batman necessarily regrows his cartilage. I think they're more going for Batman is going to push through this pain and fight Bane again. And even when he goes to fight Bane again, like, it's just this quick fight scene, and then he flies the Batwing, if you will, over the harbor. Like, there's not too much extensive, like, physical exertion on his part for the rest of the movie.
Sure, and the very fact that scene played out the way it did seemed questionable to me, just because he flies the plane, blows up or flies the flying ship, blows up a tank, and then gets out of his flying ship to just walk around with the people to gut punch random soldiers before he finds Bane in the middle of the crowd. But, whatever. Let's just assume for a minute that's logical.
They need a good fight scene at the end of it.
Right, that's what they were going for, so that's why they did it that way. Tons of other ways that would have made more sense. Yeah, that's what they wanted. They wanted the mono-y-mono.
I'm back.
Where was I going with that? Other than I didn't love how that scene played out. Even if he flew down on the top of the building, because that's what he was trying to do, was trying to get to, what's her name? His half-girlfriend for 30 seconds.
Not gonna lie, I only know her real name. I forgot her fake name.
Yeah, Talia... No, Miranda Tate.
Oh, yeah. Most generic name ever.
Andrew Tate's sister, so...
True, with how good she is at fighting. Oh, wait. She's not.
Anyways, so he's going to save her, so anyways... The point is that obviously he had to get down there. Minor point of my point, so it doesn't actually hurt the rating for me, but it just annoyed me that they had to do it that way. It didn't seem super clear. But there's things like that if you see a lot of that in the film, it's because they were rushing things or pushing things through. And this is where you start to get the feel that this is more of a average, everyday film of a superhero versus supervillain story, rather than this is a unique, compelling story that is worthy of being told in its own right?
Yeah.
This story is still compelling. I still like this story, right? It got a 7.1 for me. But this part of it, once it plays, and a lot of it going forward, starts to feel very rote.
Yeah. I think another portion of that is just the whole Gordon side story, where, like, Gordon is, like, that felt to me like so basic. I'm not gonna lie, especially towards the end. Okay, I like Gordon, but at the very end, when he's like trying to put this device on the bomb, like, it's nothing against the movie, I guess. It just goes to this feels stereotypical of, we're gonna make it so that he places it the last second.
Right. You have no doubt that he's going to actually stop the bomb at that point as the audience. They try to draw it out to make it look like it's gonna be this super close situation when you, as the audience, know it's not. You know he's gonna make it.
Also, I'm gonna be honest. Talia al Ghul blowing up or activating the bomb while she's still in Gotham doesn't make sense to me. Like, it's never implied that she's suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
So
versus Bane, who is
like Bane,
like he's
Bane,
willing to be.
Yeah, like his whole character is, so long as it's to further the mission, death is an acceptable expense. And that's why, like, at the beginning, he tells the guy in the plane, they expect one of us to be in the wreckage, brother. And so, like, he himself is a man who would not ask anything of the people that follow him that he wouldn't be willing to do himself either. And which is something that also goes to the credit of his character, like, as a villain, if you will. And not saying he's a good person. Anyways. but like,
who said that? No one.
Well, I was making a joke because I said the credit of his character. Never mind. I'm not going to explain it.
Yeah.
But like Talia al Ghul, one, she's introduced like instantly, and sure, it subverts expectations because you're not expecting her to be this character. I think that the twist was good. As far as like plot twists go. I don't know that it was a necessary plot twist though. If that makes sense. Which is another thing that I was thinking about when watching the movie was we didn't really need Talia al Ghul in this movie at all. Like, you could have just had Miranda Tate and had Bane be the person manipulating it. Because, like, go ahead.
Sure, no. You finish your thoughts, and then I'll say mine.
The reason I say, as far as her character goes, she doesn't add much is because as soon as she activates the bomb and it doesn't work, she goes, oh, well, we're going to go stop them anyways. And she doesn't stop them anyways. She just gets knocked out in the driver's seat of a truck. And that's it for her. Like, we don't see her ever again.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and that's where it's like, you get the impression that and this is where the plot twist comes in, because you're right, the plot twists and the subversion of expectations is very good in this film. This is one of those few films where they got high ratings in all of the revelations aspect of this film, because they do very good at saying, oh, this is what you were expecting? Nope, we're going to do this instead. Oh, this is what you were expecting? Nope, this is what it is instead. So they did very well at that. And I thought that, especially watching this after having already seen it, looking at how well they built up the Miranda Tate aspect is very good.
Yeah.
And this should be, for someone who wants to build a revelation, an example of how to do that well.
Yeah.
Where they go, oh, there was someone down in the prison who was this child that was the child of Ra's al Ghul, and Batman is the one who keeps assuming that this person is Bane.
Yeah.
But no one else says that it's Bane. And so for us as the audience, we get the assumption that Batman has, that it is Bane. And then when the revelation comes out, no, the child was actually Talia al Ghul, and the protector of the child was Bane. Then you get this revelation that Talia al Ghul is a super important character. The problem wasn't with the revelation. The problem was with the display of Talia al Ghul post that revelation.
Yes.
And the problem with that is significantly because the indication is that both Bane and Talia al Ghul are part of the League of Shadows. And in some ways, Talia al Ghul doesn't act like a person who's a part of the League of Shadows. She acts like a helpless wench who happens to have a bomb and is a villain.
She is a terrorist whore.
Yes, that is sure. So, also, not sure why. Well, I guess, you know what? We're not even going to think about that. But
we don't talk about the sex scene or the implied sex scene. Didn't happen.
Yes. Because it doesn't make a ton of sense. You can make the case for it, though. Anyways.
It's Batman.
That's all going to be cut out anyways. So. Yeah, so the point is that Talia al Ghul was portrayed, and this is where you have to have this Expectations is that Bane has already been built up as a super menacing villain, right? And so when you have this revelation that, oh, he's not actually the mastermind behind this. The mastermind behind this is Talia al Ghul, who's been here in the shadows the entire time. You need her to be even worse than Bane.
Yep.
Right? You need her to be way more powerful or way more cunning or way more X in some way or another. And she turns out to be kind of this lackluster character that at the end of the day, she ends up, basically being immobilized 5 minutes later after realizing she's a villain. And so
She should have
her
been more of a
display of
Cersei Lannister.
power, sure, exactly. She needed to have, even if she wasn't as strong of a fighter as Bane, she needed to have something up her sleeves that made her far more compelling than, I'm going to get into a tank, then I'm going to get into a truck, and I'm going to keep driving it.
Yeah.
Like, that's all she contributed to the story before being murked.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not a problem. And honestly, actually, this reflects poorly on the other villain of Bane, because at that point, Bane turns into Talia's whelp and does whatever she says and says, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I'm just going to sit here and die because you said so.
Yep.
Bye-bye, and goes off or actually just sits there
literally,
as she
go ahead.
drives away. So it in some ways ruins his power as a character. I'm not going to say it ruins his arc, because it's not like he has a particular arc, but it makes him appear far less menacing, far less compelling as a villain, and in some ways nerfs him. So, disappointing.
His character literally, after Batman punches his, respirator mask, he's like, I never got out of the pit. And that's it. It's like his last line of dialogue. And then he goes to Talia al Ghul, and Talia al Ghul's like, ooh, I stabbed you in the gut, Batman. Whoop, whoop. And Batman's like, what? What? Dang it. I had sex with the bad guy? How could this happen? And then she's like, push the bomb, which, Gordon, of course, stopped at the last second. And then she's like, doesn't matter. In 11 minutes, it will go off anyways. And then Batman's like, psych, punch you in the face. So yeah, it's just kind of like, in my mind, the villains kind of just fell apart at that point. Like, we had the arc, which was the pinnacle of the villains' contribution to the movie. And then the villains were like, all right, we psyched you out. Now we're going to go to the old folks' home and die there.
Yeah. And in some ways it feels like, I think most people would look at this and take away from it, they did this cool revelation, but it came at the expense of the villains. When in reality, I don't think that's the case in this scenario. It's simply that they didn't play out the new, darker terror well.
Yeah.
And that's what killed the villain story. So,
it's like they're trying
disappointing ending.
Yeah, they're trying to fit so much in the movie, and they build up to this. It's kind of like, in my mind, I'm imagining, no disrespect to Christopher Nolan, because I like a lot of his movies, but
100%.
I'm imagining Nolan writing this movie and thinking, I have this great plot twist, and then being like George R. R. Martin, and they're like, so how does it end? I don't know. We just throw something together.
Oh gosh.
And
we're still blaming that on D.B. Weiss and the boys, not on Martin yet.
Well, to George R. R. Martin's credit, he didn't throw something together. He just left everything hanging for us.
We don't actually know.
I mean, maybe if Batman had done that, it'd be a better movie. I don't know. I was disappointed with that, to say the least. I don't know if you want to move on to something else now, though.
No, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you see that Batman sees that even though he stopped the villains, the bomb is still about to explode, and so he does the Iron Man Avengers move. I don't know if this was before Avengers, but he picks up the bomb and flies off into the distance and says, time for me to die so that everyone else can live. and then the bomb blows up over the ocean, and everyone lives. What did you think about that ending?
I'm gonna be honest. The blast was a bit disappointing. Okay, in all seriousness, they hyped up this blast and they said, and I quote, "It is a 6 mile wide like radius, basically. Like that's how far the blast will
Mm-hmm.
go." And then, like 6 miles, if you go 6 miles over the bay, you aren't gonna see that thing anymore. Um, it just looks so small.
Maybe.
It's just so tiny. Um, so
That's your problem with it. Okay, I mean, whatever.
I mean, I was
I'm gonna
okay with
give the
it.
benefit.
For
Okay,
all
okay,
the things I had problems with, the ending was okay. Like I think for the Batman that Nolan was going for, having him kind of like retire ish, and I think the whole point was like the message it was sending was there's no like one purpose, if you will. Like if something doesn't work out in life, you don't just give up and
mm-hmm.
like you don't put all your eggs in one basket, and then if that doesn't work out, go, well, darn, I guess I'm gonna go kill myself now.
Right,
Which is what Batman kind of does. He's like, okay, I won't kill
right,
myself, but I'll let Bane kill me.
right.
And it's just a very defeatist attitude, and that's kind of what Alfred was going for, and his whole character was pushing Batman to like, look, Batman's over and done with. You don't need him anymore. That was a chapter of your
Mm-hmm.
life. That chapter is closed. Move on.
Right.
And then it turns out the city does need Batman again, but afterwards, Bruce Wayne's like, yeah, I'm going to hang up the cowl. This isn't for me anymore. I'm getting old. And I'm like, Wolverine, I won't be doing this till I'm 90. Um, and so,
Nice.
like, I appreciated that end. I'll be honest, it didn't really subvert my expectations for him to not be dead. Like, when the bat wing goes over the bay and blows up, I was like, there's no way he's on that thing right now. Or somehow
Mm-hmm.
he's going to come back to life. I don't know how. Maybe he jumps out or something.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, and maybe because it felt like such a stock, stereotypical superhero story at this point in the film, maybe that's what added to that, where you thought, oh, genuinely, he's going to survive this because he survived the pit, he survived fighting Bane, he survived, Talia al Ghul, he's going to survive the bomb as well. Maybe that's what's playing into that impression. But yeah, definitely, I would say I agree. I think that the how they did it was somewhat surprising, but they played it out well, where they give you a hint that, oh, Bruce Wayne is going to fix this because Lucius Fox told him he has the time to fix it, and it turns out he did fix the autopilot and goes off into the distance and blows it up itself rather than him being on it.
Yeah.
I also was giving it somewhat of a benefit of a doubt because I've seen this film before, so I didn't want to play into my own expectations of, oh, I totally recall thinking there's no way he survived or he died during that or whatever. But there was a lot of good harkening back at the very end, both to what Lucius Fox indicated with that fix that I mentioned, and then also with Alfred Pennyworth saying, I had this ideal for you to see you at a coffee shop in the middle of, uh, I forget where it was, but in the middle of
Somewhere in Europe.
Europe somewhere, right? And you have your ideal world with a girl, and you moved on with your life and had a future rather than being stuck in the past with Gotham and all the things that have happened here, right? And you see that play out. So they play out both those things super well, bring it to a nice completion, and I wasn't unhappy with it at all. So it was a good ending, I would say.
Yeah. I think for me, the reason, I'm going to be honest, I have such a hard time believing that people will kill off a superhero ever. Like, it's just unheard of.
They're not willing to.
No,
Yeah.
no one does it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why certain movies like Logan,
It's
like,
because they come back to life as Doctor Doom, don't you know?
okay, well, it's why Logan was such a good movie in my mind, because they're willing to kill off this character. Um,
Yeah.
and so, like, the willingness to actually end a character's life in a movie is not normal.
No, and part of that comes back to what is their value in the story, or what
Yeah.
is their value in what they stand for and what's going on in the plot as a whole. And that's one of the reasons why, once again, George R. R. Martin has gotten so much popularity, is because his stories take people who are in critical moments where they need to be alive and he kills them.
Yep.
And that's where it goes, like, how could you do that? Well, that's the whole point, is that people, when in your most desperate hour, are lost. It's not that they make it through every single time, because then it becomes unbelievable. People don't always make it through the darkest of moments. And when your superheroes do every single time, you start to expect that, and it's no longer a surprise when they survive. It's predictable and expected that they survive.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a little bit what you get in this one, and maybe that's the first inklings of what you see for the future of the superhero universe, where you see that for every single film going forward with the superhero genre. And that's what you've seen in Marvel since then, with the exception of Marvel's Endgame.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah, that's all that has to be said on that. I think it would be worth noting the side characters, unless you have anything else to say on Bruce or Bane or Talia.
No, not really.
Cool. So, you want to talk about Alfred, or you want to talk about Catwoman?
We can talk about Catwoman.
All right. What are your thoughts on Catwoman?
She's more attractive than the Catwoman in the new Batman movie.
Really?
Yes! What do you mean, really?
Okay, I am actually just totally not a fan of Anne Hathaway, so that's part of my personal bias. But yes. Anyways, what are your actual thoughts on Catwoman?
Those were my thoughts.
Or is that it? That's all your
Duh.
thoughts?
She's Catwoman. I think she did a pretty good Catwoman. I think she did.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I don't have many problems with her. She's not the main character, so.
no, she's not. I mean, and for being introduced in this film, she's fine. She felt pretty stock to me, and this is where and we'll get into this a bit now, but you'll see this as a theme for me, is that some characters they did very well with, and other characters they did very, very, very poorly with. And I think that as a whole doesn't hurt the story a ton, because at the end of the day, the side characters aren't the focus, right? The focus is the main character and their journey, the obstacles they're facing, the lessons they learn, and all of that. So Anna Hathaway was fine. I personally think she should stick to Ella Enchanted and Princess Diaries and do her stuff with that, and shouldn't have been in this film. But, all in all, the story was fine, so I didn't have a big problem with her, and we're going to move on to...
I've never seen those movies, so.
Oh, those are iconic for her. But you wouldn't have sisters, so you wouldn't know growing up.
What do you
What
mean?
are your
I have
thoughts?
5 sisters.
They didn't watch good films.
They
Anyways,
watched Disney princess movies, and my mom was obsessed with The Little Mermaid. And I remember a solid stint where for like a year, the only movie we watched was The Little Mermaid. God.
That's disgusting. That is actually like the worst animated film that Disney came out with back in the
You
day.
should tell my mom that. She would throw hands.
It's so bad, dude. It's... Yeah. Anyways,
Yes.
we're gonna talk about something else now. You want to talk about... Well, there's Commissioner Gordon, there's Alfred Pennyworth, or there's Lucius Fox, or there's John Blake.
Let's get John Blake out of the way. First of all, most lame Robin ever.
Okay.
Stupid. I hate it. I'm sorry.
Wow.
Christopher Nolan, you're great. You're the GOAT most of the time. But your take on Robin, or whatever amalgamation Frankenstein crap that was no bueno. I'm sorry, but no. There are there are 4 Robins, and he like tried to mix every single one together. Um, he threw in the Dick Grayson aspect of it because, you know, detective, whatever. He's the first Robin. He even has like the Dick Grayson aesthetic kind of going on. And then you have like Tim Drake, who's the Uber detective, which they really played into that one really hard. And then you've got Damian Wayne, who's the son of Batman, who ends up taking on the mantle pretty much in terms of like, or it's implied that he will. Like if anyone's going to take on the mantle of Batman, it would be Damian Wayne. But you've got this guy named John Blake, and then they throw in this random line about, I like your real name, Robin, better. That's not how Robin works anyways. And like, don't get me wrong, I like Christopher Nolan's takes on a lot of these villains and how he changes them, like Bane, or like certain things that he does. Like, they're creative, they're cool. I don't know what he was going for with John Blake. He's like trying to say like anyone could be Batman, and that was the point of Batman. No, it wasn't. Batman in the first movie literally talks about how he doesn't want to have this job anymore. He wants to take away the necessity for there to be a Batman. So it goes against all of that and just kind of like circumvents that whole arc by saying, actually, we're just going to have a different person be Batman. Not only that, how the heck is this random ass police officer going to be Batman now? Is he going to go to the League of Shadows now? What?
Sure. Well, and it doesn't fully fulfill that arc somewhat intentionally, right? So you don't know if he's going to truly be Batman or if he's just going to be his own vigilante thing. But yeah, sure, it at least hints that whatever mantle that Batman was carrying in this film, it would be carried on through Robin, whatever his full name was, to a certain degree or another, right? John Blake is to carry the mantle in some degree. I didn't, because I'm not like a big Batman comics film, right? I don't hate him as a character. I actually think he was one of the more interesting characters. But part of that was because of his interactions with Batman and how he provided a counter to him saying, hey, you have these responsibilities to take care of the city like you've done in the past. We need you. You need to be here. And all of that kind of stuff, where he takes responsibility, especially when other people in the city are refusing to do so. So I thought he was a solid character, maybe in regards to Robin as a comic book character. Maybe he's not true to that or is disingenuous in that way, but as a whole, I didn't think that he was a bad add to the story.
Well, don't get me wrong. I think that John Blake, as a character for like 90% of the movie, does good. He fulfills this role as like an up and coming detective for Jim Gordon to pour into. Like, he is the next like good cop, if you will, like what Jim Gordon was in the first movie. But it's just the way that they ended with his character. Like, the fulfillment of his arc was kind of like, what are you doing here? Like, you were very clearly building him up as being this up and coming detective in the GCPD, and then the end of the movie, all of a sudden, sorry, can't handle the corruption in the GCPD anymore, as if he didn't know it was corrupt to begin with. And they just like, it felt very forced. It felt very forced because they're just like, we just want this new person to take on the mantle of Batman. Whereas I think it would have been better for them to just go, no. The necessity for Batman's existence has gone away. The Wayne mansion is now being used as a boys' home. Like, the legacy of Batman and the Wayne family has been lived out in the fact that Gotham has been made a better place. So it felt disingenuous to his character, and it felt forced, is what I took away from it.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if you thought that it felt forced, because there's a lot of scenes in this story that did feel forced compared to the previous one. Some of that does have to do with the dialogue, where you have exposition that simply happens for the sake of furthering the plot rather than being part of a natural dialogue that occurs in everyday conversation, right?
Yeah.
And the worst example of that is when the board member is talking to Catwoman and says, oh, that thing that erases your history and whatever, blah, blah, blah. oh, that thing? Yeah, I never had that to begin with. That was simply a lie to get you to do what I wanted you to do, right? That whole monologue was completely unnecessary, except for the audience to understand why she was working with him to begin with.
Yeah.
So it was some of those things you saw regularly in this film, where they were catching you up as the audience by having this monologue that shouldn't be there to occur so that you didn't get lost in this film. Not ideal, really is a tell, don't show scenario when it should be the opposite. Show us, don't tell us what's going to happen. And so I could see how that played into your situation with Robin, where that occurred at the end. Um, yeah, probably wouldn't affect my rating personally, especially because they don't really do anything with it by creating a sequel. But it is a interesting thought.
Well, they were going to, from my understanding. I'm glad they didn't.
Nice. All right, what were your thoughts on Alfred Pennyworth?
I have mixed feelings with Alfred because, on the one hand, in my mind, Alfred is someone who's always there for Bruce Wayne. But at the same time, they give him a compelling enough reason to leave, like Wayne Manor, and just kind of tell Batman I quit. I'm not going to bury another member of the Wayne household. I'm still kind of torn though, because it's like, would he have done that? Like, it's understandable. Okay, someone would do that, but would Alfred do that? Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
Like the character they've been building up for Alfred he is one who just has this instilled reverence and respect for the Wayne family and the Wayne legacy. And like Bruce Wayne is the embodiment of that legacy. And so Alfred basically lives to serve the Wayne family, to make sure that that legacy isn't tainted. And so it's like, why does he leave if his goal is to make sure it isn't tainted? If he leaves, who's going to continue to ensure that?
Right.
Like, there are several
To his,
moments in the first two movies where Alfred is the reason that Bruce Wayne is still alive. And so by leaving, who's going to be the person to do that for Bruce now?
and this is where I maybe would counter and say that, and to be perfectly transparent in this podcast, I actually love Alfred's story arc in this film. I think it's amazing. So I'm going to go to bat for him for sure. But I think for him, it's like, that's part of the reason that he doesn't give the letter to him in the first film, right? He wants to protect Master Wayne.
Yeah.
And in his mind, he's going to do whatever he can to protect the legacy of him. And when he comes to this film, he realizes he made a mistake, right? That he protected him from a hurt that he needed to feel so that he could move on.
Yeah.
And he hasn't moved on because he didn't get that letter that he should have gotten in the first film. And he feels maybe some guilt for that, but more importantly, he realizes that in order for him to move on, he needs to make a decision to step away, because his activity that has been keeping Batman alive has in some ways also been enabling him to do what he considers a self-destructive behavior, which is to incorporate this Batman personality. And during these past 8 years, he's been somewhat stagnant in that, and he hasn't been going out and stopping crime and all of that stuff that Batman does, and so it hasn't been a problem. But when he starts to get re-involved, he goes, dude, you're old, you can't do this anymore, and he says, no, I'm invincible, I can do whatever I want. And Alfred's going, no, you can't, and why are you still doing this? And he goes, he's basically grasping at straws, and he sees that this Batman is the last straw that he's holding on to that gives him hope in a otherwise dark world. And he doesn't know what else to do, but he needs him to move on. And the best thing he can do is indulge him in this information that he had hidden previously. And he knows, both for himself, that he needs to step away, but he also understands that for Bruce Wayne to be hit by this, it's going to ruin his world. And Bruce Wayne's not going to want him around any more than Alfred thinks that he's going to be a benefit to stick around. And so at that point, his role as the butler that he's been for the past, I guess 50 years of his life or whatnot is over.
Yeah.
He's done. And he can't be this protective family figure that he's been for the past years. And he loses that and he goes away. So I think that, I love his arc. I think his arc is amazing, and it's so sad but so good at the same time, right? Because they fulfill the arcs of the previous film. At the same time, they bring in this whole emotional situation where he goes. You could see that Bruce Wayne is visibly upset, right? He's like, "This is not. You are literally wrecking my entire worldview right now by saying this."
Yeah.
And then he exits the picture. So that's my plea.
I don't think it's bad. I think for me, it's just more of kind of an interesting
Would
process.
Alfred do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think it is believable. I think just it was a question I had when watching the movie.
Sure, and that's fair.
So,
what are your thoughts on Lucius Fox? And then we'll finish with Commissioner Gordon.
I don't know that he really does much in this movie, to be honest.
Yep.
Those are my thoughts.
You're absolutely right. And actually, that's why I hate him as a character in this film.
Oh, wow, you hate him.
I think that they actually absolutely ruined him as a character in this film, specifically because of how they ended him in the previous film. And in the previous film, he's dogging on Batman because he's doing these excessive techniques with his surveillance. And he goes, this is wrong. This shouldn't happen. And then he says, all right, I'll help you this one time, but consider this my resignation, right? He's done with the Batman. He has nothing to do with him anymore. And then in this film, it acts as if the second film didn't happen. He basically goes, oh, I'm here to give you new gadgets. Where's your girlfriend? Let me help you out. I am your bro. And it's as if this whole conversation about excessive force and excessive surveillance and all the things that happened previously basically got swept under the rug. So in my mind, I think that Lucius Fox just becomes a handyman to help out whenever things are needed in this film, rather than being a legitimate character in his own right.
Okay, all right. I hear what you're saying. I don't think Lucius is like a compelling character in this story, but I also don't think that he's a bad character. And like with the second movie, I think it's important to note that Lucius Fox tells him, he puts a qualifier. He says, this is my resignation. I will no longer work for you so long as this stays up. And that's why Batman gives him the kill switch, basically. He says, okay, as soon as you're done, type in your name. That will destroy this technology. I guarantee you're looking it up right now. You can look it up. I remember this. And so that's why I find it more believable. It's also been 8 years, so it's like, if I'm Lucius Fox and I've been building technology for the Batman, and we already kind of figured out the whole surveillance part, if I see the Batman again after 8 years, I'm like, bro, I have these super cool things you could use.
Yeah, I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time right now to confirm or deny that. I think it's, I guess the wording is significant enough that it would make a difference on whether or not he is considered violating his character or not in this story. He is a minor character, like you said, so it doesn't really. And to be fair, also, Lucius Fox is not a huge determiner in my rating of the side characters in this film. But it is like I do think he did him dirty. I should go back and re-review that. I still think I'm right, but you could be right as well. So I have to be willing to give it.
Okay, so let's just say that I'm right about the way he said it. Would that change your view on Lucius Fox?
Probably, yeah. And that's why I'm saying that it would be fair to say that I should go back and make sure that's exactly what he said. Because but then it also kind of cheapens that moment in that scene as well. Like, it's, yeah, anyways, we're not dwell too much on The Dark Knight, because that's not what this film's about. But I think it's worthy of mentioning that it would change my rating, or my view of him specifically, not probably my rating. In regards to the last person we haven't talked about, Commissioner Gordon, what are your thoughts on the Commissioner?
Gordon initially starts out pretty strong, I think, in terms of his character arc, because he's very much still guilt-ridden from the last movie. Like, to him, Batman is this hero, but he can't tell anyone that. And all of this justice that everyone loves is built upon a lie. And Bane plays into this too, and he's like, everything you've done is built on a lie, my guy. It's the only reason you're able to keep peace here. And even Alfred says maybe it's time for truth to have its day. And I don't know if we're going to go too much into the themes here, but I think this film heavily plays into the theme of like the nature of man just as much as the last two movies do. And Bane is very much a fulfillment of the Joker in almost like a prophetic way when Joker says like, take away those restraints and what's going to happen. And Bane 100% takes away those restraints. He locks all of the GCPD in underground tunnels, blows up the bridges, and says, let the people have their day. YOLO.
Yeah.
And boy, do they, they go have fun. And I think it's also interesting because it's another aspect of what Bane strips away from Batman. He's like, you're wrong. Gotham is rotten to its core. And I'm going to prove it to you by literally just letting the people do whatever they want. And I think Gordon kind of sees that too, as like, he's like, we did all this work, but the second the truth comes out, what does that do to this work? What does it do to the Dent Act? What does it do to the morale of the people of the city? Is the only way to keep sanity and to keep justice to build it on a lie, to build it on a facade of this fake hero? Are people capable of following the law and being humane and having good character and like following good morals? Is the only way to do that with a false hero? And it's like this real struggle he's going through. And then, like, to my disappointment, they kind of get rid of that almost with the second half of the movie, where Gordon just ends up becoming this like resistance fighter. Like, that doesn't really conclude that arc for him.
Yeah, I almost stopped you earlier because you were talking about the stereotypical last minute drop, but when I realized it had nothing to do with Jim Gordon's actual story arc, I was like, all right, whatever, that's perfectly legitimate.
Yeah.
The for that conversation, personally, I think that they pulled not quite as bad as a Jamie Lannister on this guy, but they pretty hard character suicided Commissioner Gordon in this film. Specifically because in all of the previous films, he was a man who stood for integrity and doing the right thing. And the second one extended that by having extra responsibility. And what does integrity mean when you have people around you that you are responsible for? And does your integrity extend to those people, right? And then in this one, you see that there's a sense in which he's hiding behind this law, and he questions it for a minute, but then decides, no, we should have a lie for the sake of putting these people in prison who deserve to be in prison.
Yeah.
And then proceeds to not only have that as a continual shield for him, but then when it gets exposed by Bane in front of the media, and he's sitting there with John Blake, and John Blake wags his finger at him and says, shame on you, he proceeds to defend himself and says, well, this lie was basically doing all of this good, and it was a worthy cause, and it was something that should, like, at the end of the day, was worthy of what occurred. Now, at the same time, you know, he's lost his wife and kids who have moved off to another state, and it indicates that his life is far from ideal at this point. So, if anything, he's a broken man. But they really don't redeem him in any way, and if anything, they take everything that he stood for in the previous two films and turn it on its head and say that, oh, he doesn't stand for those things anymore. At the end of the day, he's become the commissioner who's just trying to get a job done, whatever it takes. Which is exactly what we had before he was commissioner. So, as much as it's like, I don't know. For him as a character, I thought he had such an interesting arc going, especially in the second film. And then to just take that in this film and say, nah, he doesn't stand for that anymore. And if anything, he's turned completely against his ideals. I thought they ruined his character, and I was pretty disappointed.
Yeah.
Going forward, then, since we've covered all of the main characters, any lingering thoughts about this film, and especially looking at this film as the third in this trilogy? What are your thoughts on the completion of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy?
I think this film goes to show why you should not try to pack so much into a superhero movie. Marvel would do well to learn from this. I'm not going to lie. And maybe they have, because, I mean, Deadpool and Wolverine makes jokes about long run times, and trust me, this movie has a long run time. And I think there's a lot that they try to fit in here, and while you got to pick your battles, right? You have the Talia al Ghul arc where it's like, ooh, subverting expectations, plot twist, but they didn't do anything with it. And so it's like, okay, if you're going to do this whole arc, at least do something with it and don't execute it poorly. Because I think this is a theme throughout a lot of the movie, is there's a lot of great starts and horrible finishes. It's just Game of Thrones on repeat, where you have a lot of these really great ideas, and then you get towards like the end, and then the end is just like a flop. Like, what are we doing here? Oh, this is what we're doing here. Okay, well, that sucked. You have it with Jim Gordon. You have it with the Talia al Ghul arc, and so it's just like, okay, well, you have it with John Blake, in my opinion, and so that's overall what I'm taking away from it. I think in terms of superhero movies, it's good. It's not like a bad movie necessarily. I think they just kind of tried to put way too much into this movie, and like the fact that it's almost 3 hours long, I think kind of goes to show that.
Right, exactly. And it's like, could you tell a just as compelling story in shorter time or with fewer things? Probably. And a lot of that is, it's interesting because you have a very well constructed story to start, right? Especially with Batman Begins leading into The Dark Knight, which leads into this film, which is The Dark Knight Rises, right? And so that leads to an impression that this is going to be an amazing film. And some of those most fundamental areas they do deal with pretty well, right? You have Batman, you have Bane, you have the conflict between them, you have this past that Batman can't get over. You have Alfred Pennyworth being the conscience of Batman and trying to tell him, what are you doing? You need to like step away from this, and him refusing to, right? You have some very core elements to how the story is being told that are told very well. But especially at the end, but even throughout, you see a lot of things that are thrown in that are kind of haphazard, that are extreme in some degrees, unpredictable in others. And at the end of the day, you start to see the more modern mold of big, terrible ending, surprise, quote unquote surprise plot twist, which it is actually in this one, but I would argue in other ones it isn't in newer films. And the things that you start to see in a lot of boring, predictable, modern superhero films, you first start to see the inklings of in this one. So definitely a little bit of a downer in regards to the ending, but they play out most of the other pieces so well that you don't even notice those. So that's what you get with this film, and honestly, it's not a bad rewatch. I still would rewatch it even with those concerns, and that's something to be said for Christopher Nolan, for the work he puts into his films, and how well he has continued to produce films today. Honestly, this would be on the lower tier of the films that I've seen him produce, so he's still pretty phenomenal, all things considered. And yeah, I'm sure we'll do more of his films to come. So this is just the beginning.
At all the overall podcast.
No, I mean the only thing, honestly, mine's probably gone down a little bit more at a 7. Just a solid 7 probably would be appropriate, maybe just slightly below, but that's honestly a respectable rating still, and it's right around where I expect it to be. So that
quiz thing, I got a 7.05.
Perfect. That's where it belongs.
That we're in agreement here.
And that's it. That's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. As we always are, we are going to be back next week. We appreciate the likes, the subscribes, the comments, the reviews, but we're not going to pitch too hard for those because we're going to be back for you all next week, as we always are. So we'll see you all then.